Hi everybody, my name is Zez and welcome back to another album review. Today we're reviewing the latest record from Jaden, entitled Erys. Now Jaden is Jaden Smith, who has recently stylized his name to just be Jaden. And this album serves as a sequel to his debut project, Sire, which I thought got a bit more hate than it deserved, honestly. I thought it was an okay album. It wasn't anything all that great. It wasn't anything groundbreaking by any means. It was okay. But I definitely saw some potential in him. He was still a weak lyricist at the time, by far, and he just wasn't all there. He was very pretentious, very self-centered. He thought way too highly of himself in a lot of ways, and a lot of times he just thought he was being so deep and out there when really he wasn't saying anything of value. But granted, he did have a good flow at times, and a lot of his beats were actually really enjoyable. It was a mixed bag for sure, and it definitely wasn't anything all that memorable, but it was an okay album. Then, last year, he put out the Sunset tapes, and if you watched my Worst Albums of the Year video, it made my top 5. What really disappointed me about that album was just how little it sounded like he cared. He really just felt like he didn't want to even be there. His voice was so bland. It was so underdone. He just had nothing interesting to give sonically or lyrically. It took out literally the only things that made Sire even somewhat enjoyable. And this really, really hurt him overall, I think. Sunset Tapes was a really bad album from start to finish. There wasn't a single track on there I would ever go back to. So I really wasn't sure what to expect from Erys. I was expecting a bit more of something similar to Sire, but and in some ways it was, but in some ways it was also different. Granted, this album is significantly better than Sunset Tapes. Jaden's vocals actually sound like he cares somewhat, the beats are more lively at times, and although there still are points on here where it is rather bland, I would say, it definitely just carries a bit more oomph to it, where it just doesn't sound like he's droning lazily over a microphone, because that's really the vibe I got from Sunset Tape. So I was thankful for that, but this still was not a good album. Now, if you remember from Sire, he started off the album with 4 tracks entitled B, L, U, and E, respectively, which spelled blue. And Erys now, being, and in some ways, I guess, trying to be the opposite of Sire, we start off with Pink, or the songs P, I, N, and K. And Blue was easily one of the best moments collectively from Sire, in my opinion, and Pink is no different. I actually thought the track P, which exclusively featured vocals from his sister, from his sister Willow, was actually really good. I'm not typically a fan of her music, but not just on this song, but also one of the later tracks, towards the middle of the album, entitled Summertime in Paris. Her vocals were absolutely gorgeous, I thought. I also thought the beat was really enchanting, it was really smooth, and it was pretty enjoyable. Now granted, this, along with a couple of the other Pink songs, are relatively brief, and the 4 songs really do flow together like one very long track. If you add it together, it ends up being around 13 minutes. But each part of this actually was really enjoyable to me. I thought the song I was actually pretty catchy. It was much more rap, of course, featuring vocals from, I think, exclusively Jaden, where it was actually pretty catchy. It wasn't anything amazing, but it was fun. It was simple. It was catchy. And again, his lyricism has not improved at all since Sire. He still thinks he's this otherworldly figure who's just too deep and too complex for any of these scoundrels that walk the earth to understand. But, you take what you can get, I guess. I really don't want to go into the lyrics too much on this album, because they're just so much nonsensical garbage to dissect. And he's like, I hope people understand the metaphors, but. Like, well, maybe if you had something interesting to say with your metaphors, people would bother to understand them. Anyways, the song N is also really catchy. It's fun. It's another simple, kind of smooth, kind of elegant at points, while still having a pretty hard-hitting beat at points to it. I also thought the outro kind of chant was pretty enjoyable, pretty catchy. And K was another fun song, I have to be honest. Lito's production was really good on here. And Lito produced all the songs on The Pink, and Lito did a great job. I have to really give props. It was a really fun 4 tracks at the beginning. I especially liked the intro singing segment through K. It was really fun, it was really catchy, and was easily one of the best moments across the entire album. And the rap verse at the end of K was also decent. It wasn't anything amazing, it was more akin to some of the other tracks later on from here, but it was still not that bad. The beat was very heavily distorted, which it isn't everyone's taste, but I didn't think it was that bad on here, and it was definitely done a bit more tastefully, the distortion, than some of the other tracks, which we'll get into in a second here. So, overall, Pink was a pretty enjoyable intro to the album that kind of got my hopes up, if I'm being completely honest. I enjoyed all 4 of these tracks pretty thoroughly. However, that is 4 tracks out of the 17 on here, and aside from a couple of the other songs, there really just isn't a lot to take from this project. The song Noise featuring Tyler, the Creator. Now, I have to be honest, Tyler, the Creator is one of my favorite rappers, just period. He is just purely one of my favorite rappers, and I'm always excited to hear stuff from him. I'm constantly listening to his music. He's one of my favorite rappers. Which is why I was so disappointed with his verse on here. It was horribly underdone. The beat backing it was atrocious. Jaden's verses beforehand were not any better. Tyler, the Creator, in a lot of ways went back to his old, over-the-top, gross-out, offensive self, which isn't inherently a bad thing. I do like a lot of his older work, but it really just felt like it was without purpose on here. It was distracting. It wasn't funny. It was just irritating. It was not a good song at all, and really did set the stage for what the album would slowly become. The song I Drip or Is, I think that's how you pronounce it, is another insufferable track on here. The hook is abysmal. The beat is bland. It's forgettable. Jaden's verses on here are just bad. There's absolutely nothing to glean from this song. And I have to talk about the song Again. Again is an interesting track in that it's credited as featuring Sire, which is Jaden literally featuring himself. And this has been done times before. It's been done by the likes of Lil Dicky, Logic. It's been done by artists before. And if you want to do something like this right, you need to have some sort of clear, discernible difference between what he's presenting himself now as Erys versus Sire. And aside from a vocal change, I really saw little to no difference between Sire and Erys, which just makes this feel like a failed attempt at bringing some sort of deeper meaning to the album. Because the big thing from this album is Erys doesn't feel different from what he's been doing in the past, really. It just feels like another Jaden Smith album. And I really don't see how his persona has changed that much. I don't see how his personality, his qualities that he displays in his music has changed. Nothing has changed on this thing, which just makes it that much more frustrating when he's trying to present himself as this new character and showing the contrast between Sire and Erys when there's no contrast to be found. It just feels like another Sire, if I'm being completely honest. And that's probably one of the worst things about this album, is it just feels like another Sire. Where, sure, it's not a horrendous album by any means, and granted, I did think Sire overall was better than this album, but for what it's worth, this album really just did nothing groundbreaking for Jaden as an artist, and I'm already talking about this album way longer than I expected to, so I'll try and go a bit quicker through this thing, but it's just pretentious, and it's just frustrating a lot of times. We have two songs that are very short but very different after this. The songs Got It and Fire Department. Neither of these are all that great. Got It is just a bland, generic rap cut that lasts for a very, very short amount of time. And Fire Department is actually Sounds like an alt punk rock song, and the guitars actually aren't that bad on here, but the heavy drumming and annoyingly distorted vocals really do prevent this song from being anything great. Again, I actually think the guitar riff on here was really good. It was really catchy, it was really upbeat, but there was nothing else about this song that was worthwhile. The song Mission featuring Trinidad James. James was probably the worst feature on the album. Tyler maybe was a close second. You could debate either way, honestly. Trinidad James sounded absolutely atrocious. His outro on the song sounded abysmal. I absolutely despise the beat on this thing. Jaden sounded like crap. There was nothing to glean from this song. I talked about Summertime in Paris a bit earlier. I actually really enjoyed this. It was much smoother, much more elegant, much more fun. And Willow's vocals were actually really beautiful towards the end of the track. It was a much more fun song overall. I actually thought Jaden's hook wasn't that bad. We have a couple of songs on here that are longer and have a lot of beat switches and change-ups throughout. The songs Blackout and Pain and the concluding track Erys, which is the title track of the album. These songs, none of them are good. I'll just say that for right now. None of them are good. A couple of them, Pain and Erys especially, did have a couple of catchy moments in them that weren't that bad. Blackout, not so much, but they each had their own respective beat switches, and all three of these songs were over 6 minutes, with Erys almost hitting 8 minutes, and all these songs were just not good. They just weren't good. The beat switches, although not necessarily awkward, the sounds didn't really mash up all that well together. The beats oftentimes would just go from one bland, forgettable sound to another bland, forgettable sound, and it really just did nothing for me. Again, there might be some catchy moments in the album, but either they were drawn out, they were drawn out way too long to be really consistently enjoyed, or they were just really bland and forgettable through all these tracks. Now, there were more songs on here that I did find myself enjoying. The song, I believe it's pronounced Chateau, featuring A$AP Rocky, and On My Own featuring Kid Cudi. Now, I have these songs, A$AP Rocky and Kid Cudi, respectively, stole the shows on these songs, and you can tell the production is significantly different on here, where the producers, if you look at the producer credits, there are producers on each of these tracks, respectively, that aren't on any other songs in the album, and it shows. These tracks were made for their featured artists. The A$AP Rocky beat sounds like a pretty typical A$AP Rocky beat. And guess what? A$AP Rocky sounds great on it. His flow is amazing. The beat is catchy. It's hard-hitting. It's fun, just like A$AP Rocky oftentimes is. And honestly, Jaden's verse on here wasn't bad either, but A$AP Rocky just completely stole the show. And it was still a good song. I enjoyed the song, but, I mean, both on this and with the Kid Cudi song, Jaden just got trashed by his featured artist. And it's not like they dissed him or anything, but they just, through pure talent and their showing of skill, just made him look pathetic. So, I enjoyed the songs. Both of these songs were actually really good. The beat on My Own featuring Kid Cudi was a pretty typical Kid Cudi sound with its light distortion and humming sound throughout that really did suit Kid Cudi's layered vocals over his hook, which was absolutely gorgeous, I must say. But again, he just completely overshadowed Jaden in every way. And honestly, both on this song and the A$AP Rocky song, Jaden's verses honestly weren't bad. They were probably some of his better verses across the album, but just seeing how bad he looks when compared to these artists just shows that he has so much room to grow before he really does make any sort of big impact in the hip-hop world, in my opinion. And the last song on here I haven't talked about is Riot. I'm just going to say it's not good. The distortion is frustrating. His vocals are atrocious. They're just so irritatingly distorted to the point where it's just blaring your ears, and it's just not good. So, overall, this album is an hour long of really nothing all that interesting. The lyrics are atrocious, and I mean, if I talked about all the lyrics on here, we'd be here for another 15 minutes. The beats were mediocre overall. There were some good beats, there were some really bad beats. Jaden's flow is fine. I do think he has potential to be a really intriguing, interesting, and innovative artist, but he really just hasn't done anything to prove it so far. So all that being said, I'm feeling a solid 4 on this album. If you checked it out, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Be sure to tell me how wrong my opinion is, as always, and I'll see you in the next review.